I only knew my grandmother, my father's mother, but we weren't too close. My father had 15 brothers, but all I knew was 5 of them because they didn't all live. So, and we were a close family. But I had a fabulous father. I said my mother died when I was 11, but my father was a wonderful father. And I remember him, it was only my sister Ruth and myself. When after my mother died, he remarried 2 years later. I remember last night I could even picture what she looked like, and I was only 11 years old. I remember a lot of things because my father was a very educated man. He fell in love with my mother, who worked for my grandfather. My grandfather had a sweater mill. In other words, years ago, they didn't wear coats. They wore heavy shaker sweaters. And my father had a store. And in the summer, they sold bathing suits and things. And we, as children, used to stay in the back of the store when women used to try on the bathing suits. So my sister and I was 11, 12 years old, maybe 12 years old. We used to stay in the back to see they don't steal it. And my sister Ruth was 4 years old. My sister Ruth was 4 years old. And she used to stay where they sell bathing caps. And the people used to buy bathing caps just so she could wait on them. It was nice. And I thought of that after all these years. I can picture it like it was yesterday. It's good.
Now there.
My father used to read us poetry every night before we went to sleep. Some of the poems I remember, some of the poems I don't. But what I really remember, two that stuck in my mind, was The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe, and also The Children's Hour by Longfellow. And he recited them like an actor. When he was remarried, he remarried a woman with 2 daughters he didn't marry a youngster, he married a woman his own age. It must have been, well, she must have been in her 40s. But, you know, I wasn't that tolerant. As I grew older, I realized things that I thought was terrible that she did. She was sometimes not very pleasant to my friends and all. Well, I took care of my sister. I took care of her. And my father, and I was a youngster, I was 11 when my mother died. My sister was 5 years younger. And my father had this store in the Bronx that he sold the sportswear. So, and as a babysitter, he used to send us to the Star Theater in the Bronx, which was 10 cents, and you can sit there all day. So my father used to put my sister and me, he knew the manager, because at night, at 8 o'clock, from 12 to 8 at night, we sat in the movies. And we saw the movies maybe 20 times. At that time, for 10 cents, that was cheap babysitting. That's what came back to me. And you know what? They used to have an organ player play music while the movie was on. And I had a very dear friend who was my friend until she died. But all my friends that I had, their children are still close to me, and they still come and visit me. So I must have done something right. I don't know what it was, but I did something right. And I wanted to be an actress. So I volunteered. There was a place called Heckshear Foundation, and they had put on plays. And I always used to be in the play. I wanted to be a tragedian, but I was always a comedian. We were very close, because, but we, as I got older, there's a story about my sister when she met her husband. He used to be a cousin. My father was a teacher before he had this store. He taught accounting. He was a certified public accountant. He was a lawyer. He was a master of law. And he was highly educated. My sister took care of him. When my sister I got married and I had a child. My sister was going with someone, she's 5 years younger. She was going with a teacher, and I guess the guy didn't want to get too serious, and he told her, he says, you're too good for me. I really shouldn't take up your time. That's how he got rid of her. All right? And then my father hired one of his brothers. It was a diabetic family, which my daughter unfortunately hired. So my father hired his brother to work in the office. At that time, my father had a big firm, and he was a factor too. So he hired one of his brother's cousins to work as an accountant, associate. And working with my uncle. He had a daughter, and he was a good-looking guy. And he wasn't married. So he used to bother this accountant to take his daughter out. Well, he took his daughter out took her out once to reciprocate, and then when he came to visit my father at the house, he said to my stepmother and father, his name was Doctorin. Doctorin says that your brother bothers him all the time. Why don't you take my daughter out? He says, I don't feel anything for her. So my mother said, well, then why don't you take Ruthie out, my sister? And she didn't want to go with him. She didn't want to go out with him because she didn't want any shidduch. You know what a shidduch is? To explain to her. She didn't want a shidduch. So when he did come to visit, my mother was cooking soup, I remember, and she had the ladle, the soup spoon in her hand, and she said, my sister was auburn, redhead. She said, you redheaded bastard. I didn't tell you to marry him. I just said go out with him. So she went out with him. When she came home, she said to my mother, I think I'm going to marry this guy. First, a few weeks later, they were engaged. Oh, it was before Thanksgiving, I remember. And he told his mother that he's bringing a girl for dinner. And she said to him, don't bring any girls unless you're going to marry them. And he said, I'm bringing this girl for dinner. And then she met the whole family because his sister was married to this guy and they lived with the mother. His father was a pharmacist and they lived upstairs. They owned the building and they lived upstairs. So when she brought him home to the family, and his back was towards me, and she said, how do you like him? And I went like this. Unfortunately, she told him about it. He never forgave him. Every year on December 30th, he reminded me I put thumbs down to them. But I'm glad she didn't listen to me because they were married for 60 years and had this wonderful family which I inherited too. But unfortunately, only except one son, Arthur, that lives in Chicago, they all live in Israel. Different parts of Israel, but all live. And when they come in to the States, the first visit is to Aunt Ann. So that's my good thing, because I have a big family, but I don't see them too often. But I have a lot of company. Jake and that's it. To my sister, she's the best in the world. She's the best in the world. What sister calls you from Israel every single day? We don't always have something special to say, but we learned. My father used to teach us songs, and we sing to each other, and I can see her on the internet now, that you see them moving, they see me moving, I see them, so that's wonderful.
Okay.
I always went to an all-girls school. I went to an all-girls school while in public school, high school, and then when I went to Pace Institute, it wasn't a college then, it was called Pace Institute. I had 52 men and I was the only woman studying accounting, but was quite a thing. And I remember going to all-girl Walton High School. I went to Walton High School, and we had to wear uniforms. It was white socks and black socks and black shoes. And I had to take the train to get there. But I wanted them to think I was a high school girl when I was going to. So I used to go to the bathroom in the train station and change my stockings so it shouldn't be black. Otherwise, they would know that I went to Walton High School. It didn't help much. I didn't meet much guys. Well, I studied math, and that's what I did. I worked for 40 years for one firm. Well, actually, it was two. I started off, my father got me the job because he was an accountant for this. It was a fur processing place. They had 400 men and one woman. I was the only bookkeeper. And we didn't have overtime and things like that. My biggest job was welfare, because we used to have, the members had Medicare. And I started a system where we sent out circulars once a year, because we didn't know. We paid for the women, for the wives, for the children. The union paid for the wives and the children. And I didn't know how many. They never sent out any circulars to find out who died and who lived. So I started a system where we sent out circulars. If they didn't respond, they didn't get the pension check. And all these years, I had 4 bosses that really, you voted for them. There was a president, vice president, treasurer. The only one left was one man who was the treasurer, but he never took care of the money. My other job was, after the son took over the father's firm that he created, he used to go to gamble in Las Vegas, and he left me signed checks to pay for the bills, which I did. My father used to be a factor also, so he used to lend, he and another man would lend this firm money to pay for the payroll. Years ago, we went to the bank once a week to collect. I used to figure out how many 20s I need, 10s, and I would fill the envelopes. That was a big job itself. Many times I took the work home, because I wouldn't have had time to do it. I didn't think much about it then. I knew I liked my bosses, and because my father was the accountant, I guess I received special care, And I used to come, we owned the building on 28th Street and 7th Avenue. And I used to come in on Saturday because I had the key to open this place. And it was also 2 other unions were upstairs in the 2nd floor. It was a 2-story building. I met him in front of the picket line. And he used to come specially to stand in front of the place. I knew him for 6 years. And I once said to my mother, because he was a redhead, and redheads had very ruddy complexions. And my mother said, so when are you getting married? And I said to her, I can't marry him, he's got such a ruddy complexion. And my mother said to me, after you marry him for a while, he'll turn light. But he was persistent. And I was getting older. But I learned to love him. He was the best husband. Because he really loved me. The presents that he gave me, I never appreciated it as much as after I lost him. But he was a wonderful husband. If anybody hurt me, they were on his list. He was wonderful. And he was a good-looking guy, and he was taller than me. Because I wouldn't go with anybody that was shorter than me. I was very particular. Well, that was a very hard time in my life. My husband, they discovered he had tuberculosis when my daughter was 15 months old. At that time, you couldn't stay home with tuberculosis because there was catching. So they put him at Montefiore Hospital in the Bronx, which was near where I lived, just about 5 blocks away. And I would take my daughter, and they had a balcony, and it was in a ward. He was there for 2 years. So I used to wheel my daughter, and we'd stand outside in front of where they came out on the balcony, and we'd wave to him, and he would kiss her. And remember when some people from the union where I worked came to visit me. There was one time when they came to visit me in the house, and they'd say to my daughter, "Where is your daddy?" She'd say, "He's on the balcony," and bring his picture to, "This is Daddy." So, and then when they thought he could come home, he came home, but a year later he had a breakdown. And that time they put him in near a college, a very well-known college. Oh God, I'm trying to think of the name. It'll come back to me. And he was there for 2 years. So for 4 years, I was alone with my daughter. And my father supported me. Right? Here at that time, $50 a week was a lot of money. I remember I found a from the accountant, this now at the end of the year you get the taxes, a tax. He earned $78,000, and I was wealthy. $78,000, and I considered myself wealthy. The only thing was, because he worked in an industry for another shop, I always knew what he earned, because it was piecework. So before he came home with his envelope, because when I was a bookkeeper, some of the men used to say, give me an extra envelope, and they would change the envelope so they can steal some money from the payroll.
Oh my.
She was named after my mother, who died when I was 11. The only thing is, my mother's name was Fanny, and it's a good thing I didn't name her Fanny, because she was always so heavy. Well, I always remember her as being a wonderful child. But at 10 years old, she was always very heavy and always very tall. And so she looked like 10 when she looked like 12 when she was 10. So I couldn't get a cheap ticket for her in the movies. And it used to bother me. But I treated her like she was 12. And she took care of the neighbors' children to cross them when I think back, she used to take the neighbors' children and cross them on Grand Concourse, where it had double and I thought, well, she's very capable. And when and from school, I used to have somebody, a young high school girl, which would take her from school, because I worked. I used to take her to nursery school. At that time, they didn't have a bus. I used to take her with the bus, street bus, to one of the public schools had special children's. Oh, I remember in the cold days and all, while she was sleeping, I would dress her, put her socks on while she was sleeping. And at 7 years old, she would take care of herself. I told her to stay in the house, never open the door to anybody, no matter. And she did. But she also ate a lot. All my clothes, most of my clothes, I still have. Unfortunately, she was bedridden for 5 years. She was a very bad diabetic, and her bones used to break like crazy. The last, both bones broke when she fell, and they operated on both bones. And she said, when her kidneys go, she doesn't want to live. And she planned her own funeral. She planned her husband's funeral, everything through the phone. Unbelievable. And clothes, whenever she saw something, jewelry or clothes, that she thought I would like, she always sent me. I have a lot of things that she gave. She worked in a school, public school, near where she lived. So at the summer, you wouldn't find teachers like that. There were children that didn't learn too fast, and she didn't want them to forget what she taught them. She had them come to her house and gave them lessons. That's the kind of teacher she was. And I have letters from the parents of these children that thanked, when she passed away, remembering what she did for their children who are now married and have children of their own. So she was an unusual person. And you know what bothers me? I have no tears for her. I didn't cry at her funeral. And Jace said to me, you didn't cry because you knew how she suffered. Thank you, Jay. Her name is Ariel. She's named after my husband, whose name was Arthur. Her name is Ariel. Well, I know that if I ever need her, she's there on the bottom. Whenever my daughter would say, Ariel, because when my daughter called and I wasn't home, I was at my friend's house that day, and I didn't get home till 12 o'clock midnight. They came from Bear Mountain here. When I came home, I found them sitting in my house because they had the key. My daughter called her to go see what's with Grandma. I can't get her on the phone. And if you needed her, if my daughter needed her, and my daughter needed her often because she fell a lot and she needed a lot of things to be brought to her, like chairs. Ariel was always there on the spot to help her. That's what I remember about my darling granddaughter. She was always on the spot when I need her and when they need her. Tom. Well, he's a good father. He's a good father. And a good disciplinarian. But he's very, and as long as they are happy, I'm happy. And Evan, I hope he grows up to be a wonderful, caring person like his grandmother was. Just be happy and try and do whatever you can while you're young, because you don't realize how much you missed.